Hello, BookTube. I've got a page 112 tag for you today of relatively new books. Those of you who are new to the channel, maybe new to BookTube itself, and maybe wondering what we're all doing here. Page 112 tag is something that was created by Shawn, the book Maniac, as an adaptation of a French literary prize in which, leave it to the French, the judges are not given any of the appurtenances of the books under consideration. Instead, they're only given page 112, blind, no author, no title of the book, no nothing, and not the rest of it, especially not the beginning, under the assumption that the opening chapters of any book will be heavily worked over, they'll be heavily polished, but in the course of the publishing process, because that's the part that everybody sees. So page 112 is designed to skip ahead and sort of catch the author in their true form. And Shawn adapted it for BookTube, where you examine page 112 of whatever category of books that you want. You can pull them randomly off your shelf or whatnot, and try and decide what you can tell about the book from that segment. And I've done it in many different ways. I've done it themed, I've done it with older books, and I'm going to do it today with new books. Two of which I have read, and two of which I have not. And one of which, the first one, is not particularly new. I know I'm speaking in nonsense. It's a reprint. It's an interesting reprint. Don't know quite why it was done, but it's coming out, let's see here, when is this coming out? In late March? Yes, in late March. This is Doris Kearns Goodwin. This is a reprint of her book, Lyndon Johnson and the American Dream. Her biography of Lyndon Johnson, after a couple of years spent working in his administration and knowing him quite well, so that Johnson was willing to talk to her, share his thoughts, share his papers, all that sort of thing. This came out. Well, let's read the pub sheet, because this is going to be in your bookstores in a week. In this book, Pulitzer Prize-winning author Doris Kearns Goodwin provides a captivating biography of the 36th President of the United States. As Goodwin writes in her new foreword, there's a new piece of material in this book. This new edition is timely in that it coincides with celebrates a reprisal of Lyndon Johnson's legacy from the vantage of our history. And this book was originally published in 1976 to hosannas of praise. And I read it then, and I thought that it was infuriating. I thought it went hand in hand with this paperback cover. Look at the paperback cover here, for God's sake. It's Johnson gazing away with a steely glance towards the horizon, like some sort of John Wayne parody. And in 76, it was still too close for me. It was still too recent to Johnson's own time in the White House for me to feel like reading an even-handed biography of him. And in the intervening years, I have read even-handed biographies of him, some of which have been magnificent, just incredible. And all of which have to be warts and all, because Johnson was mostly warts. And the pub sheet promises, or no, it doesn't. Actually, one of those glorious reviews, where is it? Is it quoted here? The Washington Post said that the book was absorbing and sympathetic, warts and all. And I actually remember reading that review and saying out loud to my beagles, if there were any warts in this book, I didn't notice them. But for some reason, Thomas Dunn Books has chosen to reprint this. I don't think it's any kind of anniversary. I think it's just, actually, does it say here? You got a new foreword by the author. That's a big deal. But I think the reason why they chose to reprint it is because American interest in all things U.S. presidential has never been higher. The U.S. president is not right now boring. And that always causes people to be interested in the presidency, especially when the current U.S. president has been outright saying for 3 years if you count the election, that he's not going to surrender power. We have a presidential election in 2020, and the current occupant of the Oval Office is saying that if he doesn't win, he won't concede. He said that exact same thing during the presidential race for the 2016 presidential election. He said, "I'll only accept the results of the election if I win." And that was incredibly dangerous for an American politician to say in 2016, who was just one candidate in a field of candidates. For a sitting president to say it is just I think the fact that stuff like that happens all the time now, every day, in American politics, probably causes publishers, to think it's a safe bet to reprint presidential biographies, especially something as lauded as this one. And no matter how horrible the reasoning behind that might be, I love the result. I will take reprints of any presidential biography that I can get. So we're going to go through. Let's look at page 112 of this book. I have to confess, it's going to be a trip down memory lane for me because I have not reread this book since it came out. I'm going to be rereading it this week. So what have we got here? Johnson reassured himself that open coercion was not a practical possibility in the quest for Senate leadership. We're off to a roaring start, aren't we? His instrument would be the power of persuasion. By providing others with services and desired resources, he would establish superiority over them. By providing benefits that would serve the political and personal interests of others, he would attain power. Yet the line between persuasion and coercion is thin and ambiguously drawn. Yeah, maybe you should have opened with that instead of all that Vulcan nonsense. The receipt of regular rewards from a benefactor who will also be the source of future benefits can create a dependency close to coercive power, because the ability to bestow also implies the authority to discontinue or refuse as a sign of disapproval or as a punishment. I'm at this point either sensing that Doris Kearns Goodwin turned over the raising of her children to a fleet of nannies, or hoping that she did. It was with this understanding that Johnson introduced his reform of the seniority system. Oh, okay. The way the Senate used to work, the Senate is composed of committees, and some committees have much more power than others. Some are awe-inspiringly powerful, and to be on those committees is a plum deal. It's a big thing. And it used to be purely seniority. So the Ways and Means Committee or the Judiciary Committee, these things that hold the power of life and death over all Americans, it was senior men that got on, and women that got on those committees, and juniors had no chance at all. Agricultural Reform Committee or something like that. And Johnson wanted to reform it, but he didn't want to reform it because he thought it was a clunky system. He wanted to reform it because he wanted total control over those committees. Johnson knew there is nothing more difficult than to initiate a new order of things, understanding in his own terms the principle which Machiavelli had explained, that, quote, the reformer has enemies in all of those who profit by the old order, and only lukewarm defenders in all those who would profit by the new order, who do not truly believe in anything new until they have actual experience of it, close quotes. Notice he says that he understood it in his own terms, because he's no more read Machiavelli than a pig in a poke has. And the committee system was not just another aspect of the legislative process. It was the foundation of power and the principal determinant of the conduct of Senate business. Thus, Johnson dissembled his aim in such a way that his request for change seemed like a trivial departure, which did not threaten the governing mores of the Senate. Okay. All right, well, that page 112 is it's done with gravitas. I remember that. I remember thinking it's an incredibly high wattage mind behind this book. I remember thinking that even when I thought the whole thing was a sham and a fraud. We'll see if I think any less of it this time. The fancy dancing there, the bloated rhetoric about power and coercion, that I don't know what to make about that. I don't quite remember that running throughout the whole book, so maybe I just got a bad patch. And you can see already that Doris Kearns Goodwin doesn't. I remember. She doesn't really try to hide in the course of this book where her loyalties lie. And you can see that in that little section, because there's all sorts of pussyfooting around what Johnson's motivations were, whether or not he understood or had ever read Machiavelli, that sort of thing. So that's the first book, and that's one that I have read. And we're going to end with one that I've read too. But the middle two will be two that I have not read, that are new to me. The first one is this. It is from the University of Chicago Press. It is A Decent Life, Morality for the Rest of Us, by Todd May. That's a subway platform on the cover. No idea what that subtitle is supposed to mean. No idea. Morality for the rest of us. So, okay. So what have we got here? This comes out in mid-May. You're never going to be a saint. So how good is good enough? What does it take to live a decent life? Todd May has answers. Beware. He's not the sort of philosopher who tells us we have to be impractical model citizens who display perfect ethics in every decision that we make. Okay. He's a realist. He understands that living up to ideals is a constant struggle. In A Decent Life, May leads readers through the traditional philosophical bases for a number of arguments about what ethics asks of us. Then he develops a more reasonable and actionable way of thinking about them. Okay. All right. So this is a work of philosophy, you will all know, or some of you who have been here for a number of rants will know that I don't hold the discipline of philosophy in very high esteem. It's mostly word games and word salad. And one of the reasons that I hate it is because it complicates simple things and then says that they were complicated to begin with. That is not true. That is absolutely not true. The how to live a decent life is summarized in less than 2 sentences in the New Testament. You might be familiar with it. Judge not, and you will not be judged. Condemn not, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. Anyway, let's see what page 112 has to say. What, for instance, would justify doing painful experiments on a chimpanzee, but not on a brain-damaged person, leaving aside issues like effects on the family of the brain-damaged person? Put the family of a chimpanzee in the same room, and they would have the same reactions. Don't go making a fake distinction about what families do or do not contribute to this alleged moral problem. If you put the family of a chimpanzee in a room while you're conducting medical experiments on that chimpanzee, the chimpanzee's family will react with the exact same kind of dismay, outrage, and grief that a human's family does. Okay? In fact, in a lot of cases, less. So, wouldn't the chimpanzee likely suffer just as much as the person? We know for a fact that the chimpanzee would. Both apprehension and nerve endings are the same. Or, to put the point in the sharpest form, shouldn't we be willing to do to a brain-damaged person what we're willing to do to the chimpanzee? I think I know where this is going. We should be more willing. If a human is brain damaged to the point of insensibility, a vegetable, in other words, it was the crude term of my generation. In other words, if they are non-responsive and there's no hope that they will ever be responsive, then the chimpanzee takes priority over that. The whole point is experience of life, suffering, ability to care about what happens to you. That is the whole point. But I don't know that this philosopher is going to go that far. Is there a difference here, or would be? If there is a difference here, it would be, according to moral individualism, not between the two people and the chimpanzee, but instead between the person of greater intelligence and the other two. The chimpanzee and the brain-damaged person have a greater similarity of experience and of capacities than either of them have with the really intelligent person. What on earth does that mean? A brain-damaged person is okay. So shouldn't the chimpanzee and the brain-damaged person be on the same moral level? And shouldn't our moral relationship be to both be the same, or at least very similar? Here our temptation is to say that there is a huge moral difference between the two. After all, the brain-damaged person and the person of greater intelligence are both human, and the chimpanzee is not. Doesn't that count for something morally? Doesn't the fact that the brain-damaged person is one of us, in italics, matter for our moral relationship to them? After all, didn't we see in the previous chapter that those who are distant from us don't require the same moral treatment as those who are closer to us? And isn't being a different species another way of being distant from us? Okay, so you can see from that page 112 that the author is enamored of the Socratic method. That was mostly questions. It's unfair to the author because with the page 112 tag doesn't allow me to chase down how any of those questions are answered. I like the clarity of the prose, the fluidness of the prose, and I didn't, despite my bristling at the subject matter, I just opened to the wrong page 112, I didn't detect much of the bloatedness or especially the condescension that I detect in most contemporary philosophers. So this could be a good read. That's certainly encouraging. And then this next one is the first in a series, and it's the first in a fantasy series, and I honestly don't know what's going on here. I honestly don't. In the last week, 10 days, I have received more fantasy and science fiction than I did in the whole year of 2018, and I don't get it. I hope that these publicists aren't thinking that, I mean, BookTube has some specialty science fiction and fantasy channels, including the best one of them all, SFF 180. I hope these publicists aren't expecting that level of expertise when it comes to responding to these things, but I am very grateful. It was a noticeable lack of what I was getting before. And this is the first book in a series. It's by K.A. Doer. The series is The Chronicles of Gadid, and it is the perfect assassin. There is the assassin against a red, misty background. Kind of a gripping cover. This is going to be an $18 paperback when it comes out. Or actually, it's out already. It came out on March 19th. And it is it's a fantasy based on mythologies of sub-Saharan Africa and ancient Egypt that shatters the tired fantasy tropes and brings readers a vivid and diverse world filled with assassins, ghouls, Jeanne, and blood magic. Those tropes, first of all, aren't tropes, and second, they aren't tired. If you've read them and they seem tired, that's the author's fault. Okay, not anything else. It's the author's fault. You think somebody with a blazing amount of talent can't come around tomorrow, choose every tired cliche in the fantasy rule book and write a great fantasy with those same cliches? You're nuts. Of course they can. That's what literary talent is. So let's not blame the tools. Okay, let's blame the workers. But anyway, the sell sheet here doesn't tell me anything about the book really, except for just that general rule, that general idea that this is an exotic kind of fantasy. So let's turn to page 112 and see what we can find. I know what I saw, said Amastan. Take me to the body. That's not a good, began Amastan, just as Menna cut in with a sharp no. Tamella's eyebrows lifted incredulously. Okay. All right. I know this is a fantasy novel full of all sorts of fantastical things, but independently sentient eyebrows, I don't think are one of them. I think this is so poorly put. That's all. Amastan doubted that many people had ever told her no. The body's Johnny is trapped alongside with it in a glass house, continued Menna. Then she added apologetically, it was the best I could do. We'll need an elder if we want to try anything more than that, but I can tell you now that by the time we get back, it'll be too late even for an elder. I'm sorry. Don't be, snapped Tamela. She rubbed her face, sighed. How long before someone can go up there and retrieve the body? Menna frowned. Unless the charm breaks first, a day. Unquieted, John won't go far from the body before then, and they're usually too strong to do anything about. Too wound up, you see. She flashed a smile, but it held no humor. I can bring an elder up there late tomorrow. You can't take an elder if this was a cousin on contract, said Tamila. And I don't know any other cousins who are Marab. She looked Menna straight in the eyes. How long? Menna chewed her lip. When she spoke, she sounded exhausted. Another day. The Johnny may still be near, but it'll be completely untethered. It won't follow the body. Tamela nodded, lips pressed tight in a grim line. We'll need to know who the assassin was before then to let the family know. But not only that, if he's truly a cousin, then either he was incredibly stupid or there's someone out there who can best us. It's not just that, said Amastan. His body was hidden from view in an empty glasshouse at the end of season. If it hadn't been for us, he wouldn't have been found for weeks. Okay. All right. So we're in the middle of a fairly tense moment there, and it's fairly well done. I didn't notice fantasy series books, fantasy books just in general, but fantasy books in series especially, they are prone to overwriting, to badly purple prose. And I didn't detect a whole lot of it there. It's true that there's a little more describing of facial and reaction activities than I tend to like. I tend to want a minimum of that. I think if you're doing your job, you should be able to convey that in the words. But it certainly wasn't overdone. I liked it, in other words. I liked it very much. I would read a whole book of that kind of prose. And that's the whole point of the page 112 tag. To see the page 112 tag was not to pick winners. Of course, these judges did not pick winners blind. They picked which books they wanted for active consideration based on this. Solely based on what it should be. Do you want to read more? When you're finished with that one page, do you want to read more? Without any names, without any should I want to read more. No, nothing like that. And that passes the test right there. And then the last one is also a book that I have read before. This is the paperback release of a book that came out last year, I think, that I really liked. Let me see, did this come out last year? This is by Charles Mann, who did a terrific job on a recondite subject. Yeah, 2018. this came out. I have no idea, none whatsoever, why the publisher changed the cover. It must have been for cost-cutting reasons, but this was a rare American hardcover whose dust jacket artwork was actually nice, and the paperback is simply ugly. There's no other way to put it. This is by Charles Mann, and it is The Wizard and the Prophet. And the subtitle is Two Remarkable Scientists and Their Dueling Vision to Shape Tomorrow's World. And the title refers to two sort of scientific viewpoints. The wizards are the people who come up with, the scientists who come up with all sorts of innovations to try to help mankind in mankind's current situation of a drastically overpopulated and overheating planet. And the prophets are the people who simply point out the ways that things are going wrong and will continue to go wrong and might get worse. And this is about two of those people. This is an incisive portrait of two little-known 20th century scientists, Norman Borlaug and William Vogt, who diametrically opposed views shaped our ideals about the environment, laying the groundwork for how people in the 21st century will choose to live in tomorrow's world. And William Vogt is still completely unknown. Norman Borlaug had a chance at immortality, or at least at popular knowledge, because he is described. He's not only mentioned by name, but he's described on an episode of The West Wing that is particularly well done. So some people might know him from that and might have Googled him. But this book is half about him. This is a dual biography of the two men, and it's also a study of the world that they were thinking about when they were either coming up with solutions or doomsaying. All about food production, all about crops. That's the concentration here, hence the cover. It's about crops and whether or not it's even possible for the world's farmlands to feed the world's humans, or even more to the point, to feed the world's burgeoning appetite for meat. The meat industry requires a vast amount of agriculture to support it. We're going to go to page 112 here. This is a fantastic book. I highly recommend it. I'm sorry that if you know, for budget or space or convenience reasons, I'm sorry if your option is the paperback, because this is ugly. If you like what you hear, or you want to take my recommendation, your library might have the hardcover, and that way you'd at least have a pretty book to look at. But let's see, what have we got here for page 112? Borlaug's suspicion was correct. The man with the pipe was Elvin Charles Stakeman, who had become a friend and lasting influence. Like Borlaug, Stakeman had been raised in poor hinterlands of the Middle West and got his degree at the University of Minnesota. He had become one of the first professors in the university's new established department of plant pathology. By the time Borlaug encountered Stakeman, he was a campus legend. Charismatic, ambitious, rarely modest. Stakeman did not view science as a disinterested quest for knowledge. It was a tool, maybe the tool, for human betterment. Not all science was equally valuable, as he liked to explain. Botany, he said, is the most important of all the sciences, and plant pathology is one of the most essential branches. After being grilled by Stakeman in the lab, Borlaug attended one of his lectures. The subject was Stakeman's special passion, the black stem rust fungus, a parasite that attacks wheat. Stem rust is little known today outside of agriculture, but it was long one of humankind's worst afflictions, responsible for millennia of famine. Borlaug knew it well. A stem rust outbreak had driven his grandparents out of the wheat business in 1878. Epidemics in 1904 and 1916 had led to misery throughout the Middle West and Northern Europe. Stakeman had been fighting the fungus for more than 2 decades. Years later, Borlaug would join his anti-rust crusade and find himself in the blasted field outside Mexico City. Stem rust was long so pervasive and unstoppable that Romans viewed it as a malign deity and sacrificed rust-colored dogs to appease it. Only centuries later did scientists learn that stem rust is actually a fungus, not a supernatural force. The term fungus makes rust sound simple. In fact, stem rust is a wildly complex creature, a triumph of evolutionary guile. Quote, all 5 types of spore reproduction, close quote. Lynn Margulis told me once, her eyes agleam. What's not to like? In her opinion, the fungus was vastly more interesting than the wheat it infects. And there you have a very good example of what you get on every page of this book, which is nonfiction that is actively fun to read. Totally absorbing, totally informative, but never dry. always interesting, even on, obviously, that's just random passage. Any random passage you pick from this book would point the same way, even when it's on subjects that it never even occurred to you to be interested in. And if someone had mentioned those subjects like fungus, you'd think, okay, well, it never occurred to me to be interested in that, and now that it has occurred to me, I'm not. That is not the case in this book. This author completely wins you over, and now it's in a trade paperback. This is $17, and it's probably in your bookstores now in a bright yellow. I don't understand American aesthetic decisions. The few good decisions are overturned. So here we have a urine yellow cover with a child's drawing on it instead of the gorgeous production that this was in hardcover. But we must remember, it's the book that counts. So there you go. There's a page 112 tag. We have 4 examples for you. As usual, I want to know how they struck you. So we have The Wizard and the Prophet, regardless of page 112 or of the cover design. I highly recommend this book. Then The Perfect Assassin, book 1 in the Chronicles of Gadid, a new high fantasy series with a distinctly Middle Eastern feel. Johnny sounds a lot like Jinns. And then A Decent Life by Todd May, who has apparently made a career out of writing slim, popular philosophy texts. Interesting enough in its own way. I certainly detected nothing bad, prose-wise, in the segment that I read. I would read a whole book of that. In that regard, most of this page 112 was actually positive. The only possible exception being Lyndon Johnson and the American Dream, where that page 112, it was a little bit mealy-mouthed. It was a little bit equivocal, and I can do without that, especially with a figure like Johnson, where you have to be brutally honest. If you're not, anyway, so that's it. That is a page 112 tag for you. Don't know how many more videos I'll have today, believe it or not. I just got out from under a massive deadline thing, and now I've got company coming. If my company agrees to be on camera, you will certainly get another video today. If not, it might be that this is the only one. I'll let you know. You'll be the first to find out. Thank you, BookTube.